Serving a sentence in a state county jail isn't easy, and Tyler Griffin knew it like no one else. Having been sentenced to 10 years for first-degree murder, the man has been wasting away within the impregnable prison walls for over a month now. Overall, the conditions of his detention were tolerable, and Tyler didn't really have much to complain about. Unfortunately, the young prisoner rushed to the erroneous conclusion that most of the stories about prison were exaggerated. Of course, in order to survive, Tyler had to strictly adhere to the established rules and follow all the orders of the guards. However, that wasn't all that hard to do, and thus, it didn't take that much effort for the smart young man to become a model inmate. Moreover, Tyler was incredibly fortunate to make good friends. It just so happened that once he got to prison, an elderly inmate took a liking to him, and his authority within the walls of the correctional institution was indisputable. Larry Cooper was in his 60s and spent most of his life behind bars. The experienced inmate knew the unwritten laws of prison perfectly well and never tried to break them. Seeing Tyler the day he arrived, Larry immediately recognized him as a first-time offender and took him under his wing. The man didn't want him to suffer or become a victim of someone's aggression, letting him in on the intricacies of life within the prison walls. It's hard to say how Tyler's fate would have developed if it weren't for the help of the experienced inmate. But when Larry found out what exactly the man got his time for, sadness and anxiety were reflected on his face. "You won't have it easy in here, Tyler," the elderly prisoner drawled with sadness in his voice. "What's the matter, Larry? Who cares what I'm in for?" Tyler asked in surprise. But the experienced inmate only shook his head in response and looked longingly out of the barred window. Larry's fears weren't unjustified. He had a good reason to feel this way. And the reason for his worries had to do with the prison warden, Reynold Moore. The thing was that about 8 months ago, some unknown people killed his son in an alley. Despite the fact that Reynold also had a daughter, his heart broke over the death of his son. Having lost his son, the warden started treating each murderer who got to his prison with extra strictness and contempt. Since the person responsible for the death of his son was never found, Reynold Moore spared no time and effort trying to restore the imaginary justice. The most interesting thing was that Reynold Moore, obsessed with the thirst for revenge, never actually broke the law. Everyone is out in plain sight in prison, so it is difficult for the inmates to hide from the watchful eye of the warden. And now, since Tyler was convicted of murder in the first degree, Reynold Moore was expressing interest in him. Larry Cooper was 100% sure that the warden would make Tyler's life unbearable. Therefore, having become friends with Tyler, Larry felt the need to warn him about the danger. He knew that Tyler would have a hard time standing up against the attacks of Reynold Moore, who saw the killer of his son in every convicted criminal. Unfortunately, the warden didn't know one important detail. Tyler didn't actually kill anyone. He was convicted by mistake. All that the young man was guilty of was having come home earlier than usual on that fateful day. That was the unusual gift that the management of the company where Tyler worked decided to give their employees for Thanksgiving. Having stepped inside the house, the man immediately felt that something was wrong. The first thing that caught his eye was the men's clothes that were hanging in the hall and didn't belong to the owner of the house. But the worst part was waiting for the young manager in the bedroom. There he found his wife, Emma, in bed with his best friend, Fred Foster. Seeing Tyler, Emma instantly changed in the face and turned pale. "No, it's not what you think. Wait, I can explain," Emma said. But Tyler didn't need anything explained. Grabbing Fred by the neck, the husband threw him out into the street, not even allowing him to get dressed properly. Dragging him to the door, Tyler also managed to put in a couple of heavy slaps, which of course didn't cause him much harm. Then the man told his cheating wife to follow his ex-friend, advising her to prepare for a divorce. That evening, Tyler was devastated to realize that he was betrayed by two of the most important people in his life. This realization caused the man so much pain that it's impossible to even put into words. Suffering from self-induced insomnia, Tyler sat in the kitchen until midnight. And when he finally managed to fall asleep in the morning, he was woken up by the police, who broke into his house. Without even offering an explanation, they handcuffed Tyler and threw him on the floor. It wasn't until he arrived at the station that the young manager found out that he was being accused of killing Fred Foster. As it turned out a little later, Fred was attacked the night before, which ended in his death. You have to believe me, I didn't kill Fred. I won't deny having slapped him a couple of times after I caught him in bed with my wife. But I had nothing to do with his death. Tyler tried to justify himself. But the police officers believed that the situation was clear as day. They were basing their theory on the information provided by the unfaithful wife. The investigation was completed in record time, and after a spectacular trial, Tyler ended up in the Maine County Jail. Of course, the young prisoner kept writing complaints to various authorities, but they were of little use. No one rushed to have his case reviewed, and even more so, they weren't going to look for the person who actually committed the crime. Having learned Tyler's story, Larry Cooper started thinking. The experienced prisoner understood that if Tyler stayed in prison for a long time, Reynold Moore would have turned his life into a living hell. That's some story you got yourself into. Now, it's important to get you out of it as soon as possible, Larry said during lunch. Tyler looked at the elderly inmate in surprise and asked, "Well, what am I supposed to do now? Fall at the feet of the warden and beg for mercy?" Larry chuckled and, putting aside his plate, answered, "Well, that isn't your only option. You shouldn't beg for mercy, but you should seriously consider escaping. I heard the guard talking. They're going to transfer you to a different block in a couple of days. Do you know what that means? I won't be able to help you anymore, so you need to act fast." Larry's words shocked Tyler. "Escape? But that's impossible." The young man was getting agitated. "Don't worry, I've already thought of everything. You'll get out of prison in a garage container. It will be empty. Do you follow me? I'll make a deal with the driver of the garbage truck." Larry Cooper replied in a tone that brooked no objections. It was only now that Tyler realized how serious the situation was. The man had no way back, so he was forced to accept Larry's offer. Tyler couldn't close his eyes the night before the escape. All he could think about was how not to get caught. The next morning, he climbed into a garbage container, as per their plan, and waited for the driver. Soon, the garbage truck drove into the prison, and the container with the fugitive inside got loaded onto it. Having passed the checkpoint, the garbage truck turned onto the highway and drove towards the city dump. When the truck was about a mile away, Tyler climbed out of the container and, throwing his body over the side, jumped onto the road. Looking around, the man ran as fast as he could towards the nearest forest, which was almost adjacent to the highway. Tyler knew that he wouldn't be missed, at least until lunchtime when the roll call was held. But after the guards learned about the young inmate's escape, search parties would be launched immediately, and they would be reinforced by rangers with search dogs. Making his way through the forest thickets, Tyler felt like a hunted animal. The man couldn't afford to rest and had been walking for hours on end. Sweat was streaming down the fugitive's face, and his feet were covered with blood blisters caused by the rough prison boots. Tyler didn't have a watch and could only tell time by the sun. Eventually, the forest began to thin out, and the man realized that he would soon get to the city. Suddenly, the fugitive's attention was attracted by some strange sound, more like a muffled sob. "What is this?" Tyler thought anxiously. Coming closer, the fugitive carefully parted the bushes and was stunned by what he saw. A round clearing appeared before his eyes. There was a young woman and a guy in a hoodie, with the hood pulled down over his eyes. There was a knife in the stranger's hand, and Tyler immediately felt the threat emanating from him. He was most likely a mugger who ambushed the young woman into a secluded place. And realizing that he didn't have time to waste, Tyler jumped out of his hiding place and attacked the criminal from behind. There was a fight, which the fugitive inmate won. The young inmate carefully looked at the woman and commanded, "Call the police, miss, right now, but I have to leave." To Tyler's surprise, the young woman grabbed his arm and asked him to stay. "Don't leave, please. I'm very scared. My dad is the prison warden. Maybe this attack is somehow connected to his job," the woman said. Hearing this, Tyler nearly passed out. Well, that's an unfortunate turn of events. How could this have happened? Flashed through the fugitive's mind. Meanwhile, the woman called the police, and Tyler had nowhere to go. The stranger's name was Hannah Moore, and she was indeed the daughter of the warden of the state county jail. Of course, Tyler could have left the crime scene and gone back into the forest. But for some unknown reason, the fugitive prisoner decided to stay. Meanwhile, he didn't want to look like a coward in Hannah's eyes. Or maybe the man was just tired of being on the run. Whatever it was, Tyler stayed and waited for the police together with the warden's daughter. Unfortunately, a miracle didn't happen, and the police immediately recognized the patch on the prisoner's uniform. Handcuffs soon snapped on Tyler's wrists, and he was detained along with the mugger and placed in the back seat of the patrol car. Still confused, Hannah tried to convince the police that Tyler was innocent. "Stop it, miss. This man is a fugitive prisoner. He escaped from prison in a garbage truck just recently. Moreover, he's a convicted murderer and is extremely dangerous." The police officer answered in a tone that brooked no objections. "What criminal? This can't be true," Hannah Moore whispered, turning pale. But the police weren't going to waste their time trying to convince her. Instead, they went to the station to interrogate Tyler and bring him back to prison. For the unfortunate inmate, this turned out to be a real tragedy. Tyler knew that by escaping, he was condemning himself to an even longer prison term than he had before. But the worst part was that sooner or later, Ronald Moore would definitely take out his anger on him, since he caused the emergency situation in his prison and the large-scale search. Being in solitary confinement, Tyler was waiting to be called into the warden's office any minute to answer all the questions he might have. Of course, the man was sure that this conversation was unlikely to be easy. Thus, Tyler spent about a month in agonizing anticipation. And then, Ronald Moore came to his cell. By the prison standards, it was something out of the ordinary, and even the experienced inmates couldn't remember anything like that ever happening. "Well, hello, Tyler Griffin. Didn't expect to see me here? I have some good news for you. The real killer of Fred Foster was caught 2 days ago. He is now testifying and actively cooperating with the investigation. Do you understand what that means, son? Your case will be sent for review," Ronald Moore announced solemnly. Tears welled up in the young man's eyes. He insisted on his innocence for so many months, and now they finally believed him. Understanding the man's feelings, the warden patted him on the shoulder and added, "Oh, I almost forgot. I'd like to say something else. My daughter asked me to thank you for saving her, and I thank you too." The warden's words caused Tyler to blush to the very roots of his hair and lower his eyes in embarrassment. The man was ashamed to admit it even to himself, but he really liked Hannah Moore. About a month later, Tyler was acquitted and released from prison. Moreover, the man was promised compensation for the time he spent behind bars. Hannah Moore met Tyler at the prison gates. She even brought him a bouquet of wildflowers on the occasion of his release. Hand in hand, the young couple headed towards the nearest bus stop. Chatting about everything in the world, they laughed so contagiously that people on the street thought they had lost their minds. In fact, they really liked each other, and their friendship could clearly develop into something more at any moment. But for now, it was too early to say anything for sure. A new life was waiting for Tyler and Hannah, which would have nothing to do with criminals, slander, and false accusations.